into the towers of the World Trade Center. Good evening. An astounding tragedy is unfolding at the moment in New York. Two planes apparently flying deliberately into the twin towers of the World Trade Center. It's believed both planes were commercial aircraft. The two buildings are spewing smoke and flames. There are so far no details of casualties, and further complicating this tragedy is that the FBI is investigating reports of a hijacking before the crashes. So here's the situation. Two planes, 18 minutes apart, crashing into the highest and most distinctive landmark in New York's Manhattan on a clear day.
One of New York's landmark buildings, the accident left the city stunned.
Well, I was in the PATH train and there was a huge explosion sound. Everyone came out. A large section of the building is blown out.
With smoke pouring from the upper stories, emergency crews have begun a massive rescue effort.
Can you tell us anything about how much debris came crashing to the ground and whether or not anybody was hurt as a result?
I honestly don't know. I just saw a lot of what looked like crumbling glass, maybe just a lot of stuff falling down, but not, I can't tell you debris-wise.
It's not known what type of plane hit the building or how many people have been killed or injured. And yet there was more drama to come.
Looks like 6, 7 floors were taken out. And there's more explosions right now. Hold on, people are running.
Listen, hold on just a moment. We've got an explosion inside.
The building's exploding right now. You got people running up the street.
Okay.
Hold on, I'll tell you what's going on.
And then I saw a plume of flame shoot out of the Trade Center over the Hudson River. And then I saw the plane that had crashed into the Trade Center fall down, and then it disappeared behind a building that blocks my view. There was a tremendous amount of smoke, and then it started to rain huge pieces of paper, and the paper continued to come down. At that point, all the news media started to learn about it, and I turned on my radio, and while I was still sitting at my desk, I saw a second jet, fairly large plane, fly in over the south end of Manhattan and deliberately fly directly into the Trade Center before my eyes.
Raymond Dale for Nightline.
So let's now cross live to New York to our affiliated network in the United States, ABC America.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
President clearly shaken, I think one can say, confirming what we think we all knew, which was that two aircraft in an act of terrorism crashed into the twin trade towers. Nobody was quite certain about the first one at the very outset, but the President absolutely, having talked to the Vice President, the Governor of New York, the Director of the FBI, now believing and confirming that we have two terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, and the President saying the two things which a President must say at a moment like this: terrorism will not stand, which is an important thing for him to say, but not always necessarily effective, and God bless the victims and their families. John Miller, what are you picking up on the police radio?
There was a bit of a stir a moment ago because LaGuardia Tower reported urgently that there was another aircraft moving fast in the no-fly zone. Now they've contacted that aircraft and they say it's a military aircraft that's rushed to the scene to enforce the no-fly zone and literally be a presence in the area in case there is another plane headed for the building, so that there'll be some at least armed aircraft up to confront it.
Just think for a second, John, how you have drawn an extraordinary parallel. We think of no-fly zones as being in southern
Iraq
and northern Iraq, where the Iraqis are not allowed to fly, and if they do fly, are going to be shot down. Now we have a no-fly zone all around the lower part of New York City, and perhaps on the northern area too. All of the areas, airports closed down, and armed American aircraft in the air to shoot down anybody else who wants to take a shot at the place.
I mean, those are the reports that are coming across the radio now, and if they're true, it's quite incredible and certainly unprecedented.
Well, it would also suggest, as best you can tell, looking at it from this very sort of antiseptic environment that we are all in our newsrooms, is that the reaction has been fairly quick. New York City has an Office of Emergency Management. It's over here on the west side. It's a great bunker. Which the city,
ironically, it's located in the World Trade Center complex, although not in the Twin Towers.
Just
right next door,
north of the Trade Towers,
right.
in the World Trade Center, in the other northern World Trade Center there. And on an occasion like this is not one they absolutely anticipate when they got going. They're talking very concerned with chemical and biological warfare. They've got extensive plans about that, which they very often demonstrate to the press. I'm going to interrupt myself and everybody else for a second, because one of our senior producers, Mark Obenhaus, is on the phone, and he saw the incident. Mark, do you hear me?
I do indeed, Peter.
Go ahead.
Well, I was leaving my house to go to work, and I walked down the street to go to the subway. I was at the corner of Franklin and West Broadway, and as I was approaching the subway, a tremendous roar went over my head, and I looked up immediately, and it was a plane, and much lower than I've ever seen a plane in Lower Manhattan. And it was a large plane. I couldn't identify it as anything specific except that it was a commercial jet, certainly. And then my eyes followed it, because this is approximately 15 blocks from the World Trade Center, and it just slammed right into it and was completely engulfed by the building. It was extraordinary. No wings flew off, nothing like that. It just went directly in, creating this sort of cavern-like hole, and suddenly then big flames started protruding from it, and then of course smoke, and then debris started just catapulting. And of course the area that we're in, there's a great deal of foot traffic, and people are just approaching and beginning to just gasp at just the sight of the building itself. Even if they hadn't seen it, the actual incident, the actual impact, just the sight of this huge building engulfed in flame with this massive cavernous hole in the side of it. And we stood there, I can't tell you the amount of time, I would estimate to about 15 minutes. And of course there's all kinds of services coming down, fire department and so forth. And then suddenly, from my vantage point, which would be north of the building, the far tower suddenly explodes in flames. Yet again, a similar kind of an event. And I now see, I've run down the street to my home where I have the television on, and I saw that too was another airplane. From our vantage point, you couldn't tell what exactly it was that hit the second tower, but it was a similar, seemingly almost like bomb blast, and with flames and debris protruding wildly from the building.
Mark, let me ask you a couple of more specific questions. You now confirm for us, I think, that it was the first attack on the tower that you saw.
Yes.
What direction was the aircraft coming from?
It was coming from the north.
It was coming from the north down over Manhattan itself?
Yes. It would have been flying roughly over the west side. I'm on, as I say, West Broadway, which is probably a quarter mile from the river. So it was on a direct path north, from the north, into the north tower.
Do you remember whether it had 2 engines, 3 engines, or 4 engines?
I do not. It was very quick. It struck me, the profile, the body of the plane was of such scale that I immediately identified it as a commercial jet. It happened so quickly I couldn't tell whether it had windows on the side or what. It could very well have been some sort of a transport plane, but it was a large plane. As opposed to occasionally down here you do see smaller prop planes or smaller aviation stuff that flies around here, sometimes doing movies and things like that. But in all my years down here, and I've lived down here for about 20 years, within walking distance easily of the building, I've never heard anything like this, and that's why I just immediately glanced up and just followed the track of this sound and this huge plane that was swooping over my head.
Could you see any markings on it whatsoever?
No, I did not. It was too quick. I can't give you any kind of identifying help on what it was.
Do you remember what color it was?
My impression was that it had a tan coloration to it. However, the sun, it was very low in the horizon, and I think kind of orange, and it may have been simply the color of the sun reflecting off a silver exterior. I really am not sure of that.
Okay, Mark. Anything else? What's the mood in the environment down there at the moment? As if it's not hard to imagine.
And everyone who glimpses it close up, it's quite different seeing it from the ground than on these television pictures that I'm now looking at, because it's close to you and you see what the impact must have been like, and you see the kind of devastation that has incurred by the buildings, and it's just frightening is perhaps even too mild a word.
Okay.
It's absolutely just a horrible, horrible sight. It reminds you of the worst kind of effects in movies that, you know, you're reassured watching a movie that it's an effect, but this is not.
Well, Mark, you and I are supposed to have a meeting not long from now. We'd prefer you to go and work the story, if you would, and call us back as soon as you can.
I will indeed.
Many thanks. Mark Obenhaus, one of our senior producers on the phone, who saw the incident, describes it as a large plane, not sure what the color was, not sure the number of engines it had, which in his mind, he's a very experienced reporter, reflects the speed and surprise with which this aircraft, this is the first one we're talking about now, just before 9 o'clock, approached the World Trade Towers from the north, causing the first huge gap in the building. And Mark describes the plane being engulfed in some respects by the building. Didn't see wings fall off, saw it go absolutely, totally, almost as he described it, into the building itself. And we now have had one of the enormous difficulties about terrorism, everybody knows, is that you almost immediately get a claim of responsibility, and you may get several, and people's suspicions get ramped up given the obvious nature of people who they think are or know are involved in terrorism around the world. There has been a claim of responsibility, according to the Reuters news agency, made to Abu Dhabi television in the Persian Gulf from something called the Palestinian DFLP. The Palestinian DFLP is something called the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It has been for many, many years one of the most militant of the Palestinian organizations, has been involved in violence before, has been involved in other actions before, and it is the first organization to claim responsibility for this, though we have to caution you in all the obvious ways that before the day is over, there may be any number of people who claim responsibility. The White House, of course, has leapt to the forefront of people's concern this morning, and there is a plane circling the White House at the moment, and they're clearing the grounds there. That's a report which may be misleading in that it may presume an attack, whereas we just discovered a moment ago that what we had with an additional airplane in New York airspace was a security operation. I think probably most Americans know that there is no building in the country which has heavily defended, I shouldn't say deemed secure, but a battery of anti-aircraft missiles on the top of the White House itself. We've had an incident, as you know, in the past, several years ago, where a small aircraft landed in the White House garden, and the pilot, mentally deranged, as I recall at the time, was killed. But the White House is certainly been very heavily defended, and this plane circling the White House adds to the trauma that people are feeling today, but we have no idea precisely what that means. John Miller, you're listening.
The scene is still in some degree of chaos, but the police have set up a major mobilization point just outside the building, and they've set up a tactical mobilization point. The major mobilization point is for the responding units involved in the rescue. The tactical one is actually an armed mobilization point for security outside the World Trade Center now.
Thanks very much. Let's go to the White House. Claire Shipman is on the phone. Claire, what's that we're looking at?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out right now. All we know is it's a gigantic plume of smoke coming from behind the old executive office building, and we're told that the White House itself, the West Wing, at the very least is being evacuated, that our personnel from there are being asked to leave. We've sent people running over there to try to find out what it is, but we don't know yet.
Now, the old executive office building is slightly to the west and a fraction to the south. So we are looking southwest from a camera just across Lafayette Park, which is north of the White House. The White House is to the left side, out of your picture. Maybe even the cameraman could give us some appreciation. But you have no idea. Was that an explosion? Did you hear anything?
We did not hear it. In fact, we were trying to figure out from the White House what security precautions they were taking around the White House in the wake of the apparent attacks on the World Trade Center, and we suddenly just saw the smoke rising from behind the old executive office building. We have people on their way there now, but it's like nothing I've ever seen. I mean, we've never seen that kind of smoke coming from anything that would ordinarily occur here.
I must also tell you, Claire, I think if you think about what's behind the EOB there, you're really down in pretty open area. It doesn't look like a place where a building would be on fire.
No, that's right, although there are a number of buildings just behind the old executive office building on G Street that could potentially be on fire, but nothing you would necessarily think of as a target. Apparently, we're also...
Claire, let me interrupt you for a second. We now have fire confirmed at the Pentagon. John McCarthy at the Pentagon can hear me. John, please get in touch immediately if you can and brief us in there. John McCarthy has actually been evacuated from the Pentagon, and parts of the Pentagon are indeed being evacuated. We want to hold our breath here, it just seems to me, for a second, and not get into a mode that the country is under attack. But we now have 2 attacks on the Twin Trade Tower Center. U.S. buildings, city buildings completely evacuated in New York City. We have this mysterious black smoke at the southwest corner of the White House, which is to say there's something going on behind the old executive office building. We now have a report that fire has been confirmed at the Pentagon. ABC's John McCarthy, our Pentagon correspondent, who's been plugging in as quickly to the intelligence and counterintelligence units there this morning, has been temporarily evacuated. But that is as much as we know for sure at the moment. John Miller, go back to what you're hearing on your nets.
Actually, it's interesting. In New York City, they're reporting on what we're seeing here also, essentially trying to tell everybody that heightened security is important now.
John, I apologize. There's a lot of us here. What are we listening to there? Say again. Say again, please. Come here, John.
Constantly reporting that bomb squads are checking out Air Force One before the president.
Good. Try to correct. So we have bomb squads.
I think you're going to see a lot of this, and I think we were talking about this a few minutes ago. In fact, when I was telling you that in New York they were evacuating the municipal building, the United Nations, Gracie Mansion, which is the mayor's residence, all potential targets, I suggested to you that shortly in Washington you'll probably be seeing the same kind of reaction at sensitive symbolic locations. And apparently that's become more than a concern, but perhaps a reality.
Okay, we do know, or at least the Associated Press is now reporting, that an aircraft crashed near the Pentagon, and the West Wing of the White House, as Claire Shipman told us, was evacuated amid these threats of terrorism. I guess first of all, let me go to another eyewitness. ABC's Bill Blakemore, one of our senior reporters, has been an eyewitness to the New York incident. Bill, you on the phone?
Yes, I am, Peter.
Go ahead.
I'm down at 12th Street. It looks like we're more than a mile north of this very surrealistic site, and business has completely come to a stop here. Looks like throughout lower Manhattan, people standing in the streets, cell phones aren't working. A few of these phone booths, such as I'm talking to you from now, are working. One man, just shaking his head, said to me a few moments ago, I was supposed to be at a meeting in the building at 10:30 this morning, and then I saw the second plane hit the tower in this flash of light. There's a complete cessation of regular life. There's one delivery man standing here looking like he doesn't know where to go with this stack of beer crates. So all of lower Manhattan is just standing in the streets on this sunny morning looking at this unrealistic sight in front of us, this gray smoke coming out of the Trade Center.
Okay, Bill, talk to as many people as you can. Call us back when you can. Let's return to Washington visually at the moment. Just take a look at that picture. That smoke behind the Executive Office building, which is right next to the White House, we now believe is from a fire in the courtyard of the Pentagon, or at least where an aircraft appears to have crashed in the general vicinity of the Pentagon. And now the Pentagon is southwest from the White House across the Potomac River, and what we think we may be seeing there, emphasis on think, is smoke in the distance rather than immediately behind the Pentagon. Precautions being taken everywhere. The U.S. Capitol is now being evacuated as a precautionary measure. The U.S. Treasury, according to at least one eyewitness, is being evacuated as a precautionary measure. And there was an explosion outside the Pentagon. And that's an issue of eyewitnesses from both inside and from outside, but we're not quite sure what we're looking at. And we are looking now at Air Force One. We've just been told by ABC's Ann Compton that there's been a serious investigation now, or serious check of Air Force One before the president, who's been in Florida, gets on it and flies back to Washington. All of this, of course, adds to the tension, adds to the fear, but all of it makes absolute common sense. And there is no aircraft in the world, to the best of my knowledge, which is given as intense security as Air Force One, which is what any aircraft the president flies on is designated, of course, wherever it is in the world. And today it's been at Sarasota in Florida. I want to get somebody to fix some monitors here for me, please. I want this monitor in front of me here to look like that monitor, so I know what I'm looking at right now. Thank you. The President will, having already spoken very briefly to the nation, saying, as we said, the obvious and necessary thing that terrorism will not stand, calling for a moment of silence, to acknowledge, to recognize, to honor, to deeply sympathize with the victims of today's attacks. The President then said he would come back immediately to Washington. I think we all know that the President is never out of touch with the events of the moment, wherever he is. But as of the moment, listen to this, as of the moment, from west to east in the United States, there are no airplanes taking off that are at least under the control or are obeying the Federal Aviation Administration. At O'Hare Airport in Chicago, for example, planes are still landing, but all departures have been stopped. The Sears Tower in Chicago, Chicago's great landmark tower, has been closed, and there are no aircraft taking off in the U.S. This is clearly because while we have not been able to confirm, precisely what happened, there is for the Pentagon, that is the courtyard of the Pentagon. The Pentagon is indeed exactly what it's described, just on the other side of the Potomac River from the Capitol, and there you see fires burning in the courtyard of the Pentagon, confirming what we'd been told almost immediately by eyewitnesses. We've also been told it was a plane crash. So our belief at the moment is that an aircraft has crashed into either the courtyard itself or into that particular side of the building. Parts of the Pentagon have been confirmed. You can hear it, just listen. And that's what this looks like from just across on the north side of the White House. Those are the same incidents, to the best of our knowledge, the same incidents. And if you look at the amount of smoke at the Pentagon, this is huge. This is huge. The State Department is now being evacuated as a precaution. We're simply not able to get a good handle yet on what precisely happened at the Pentagon. But we do know that nowhere in the United States, at no commercial airport under the control of the FAA are aircraft taking off. And this is in large measure because it has now been reported by several news agencies that the first aircraft, I beg your pardon, the one of the two aircraft which crashed into the Twin Trade Towers just before and just after 9 o'clock Eastern Time this morning was hijacked out of Boston. We do not know the airline. We're not able absolutely to confirm that, but there are several reports, and that led to the intense concern with the FAA and with the National Intelligence Services, all of the airspace in the general area of New York City, and now subsequently in Washington and everywhere else, be sealed as one would try to seal a building in order to prevent a third and fourth, whatever, incident similar to the first two. But that is the Pentagon, and as ABC's John Miller just reported a moment ago, the scene on the ground in New York City is still pretty chaotic. Emergency rigs, emergency services have converged on the Twin Trade Towers at the very same time that other high-profile buildings. Nancy Gabrino, I'm not sure. Do we know if the United Nations has been evacuated yet?
The police department on the New York side has ordered the United Nations evacuated. In fact, they did that very early on, almost immediately after it became apparent what was going on here. Right now, at the World Trade Center, the emergency units are reporting there's still debris falling onto the street on the east side of the building, including a second body, which has fallen from the wreckage on the upper floors. They're also talking about people who are on the roof, and they've asked if the aviation unit from the police department can get up there and pick people up. But again, because of that smoke, as we discussed before, they're going to have real trouble edging in there.
As we look at the Pentagon, again, we have to say that sometimes the camera and the eye don't see precisely what is happening. We have now had eyewitness reports from our sources in Washington say they did see a plane crash in the vicinity of the Pentagon. We're looking at it from the Washington end, which would be to the east of the Pentagon, slightly to the northeast of the Pentagon itself. And it looks very much as if there is fire in the courtyard itself in that central quad. But you can see a small plume of smoke on the northern side of the building as well. At least I think it's the north. Yes, it is the northern side of the building as well. And we're not absolutely certain. The Associated Press, quoting a senior U.S. official, or quoting a U.S. official, is now saying affirmatively that one of the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was hijacked after takeoff from Boston. At this time of day, any number of aircraft taking off from Boston to go to ABC's John McWethy believes that it was an American Airlines flight number 11, bound for Los Angeles. And I realize when saying that, we're going to put the fear of God into a lot of people on the West Coast and people who know, who are connected with that flight. But our Pentagon correspondent, John McWethy, just reports into us that American Airlines Flight 11, bound for Los Angeles from Boston, was actually hijacked out of Boston. That's a helicopter over the Pentagon. I apologize to the audience. We have two separate monitors here. They show different pictures. Could you tell me which one the audience is seeing at home so I can work with that? And may I not have to ask again? Thanks very much. I don't. And so we now have the first incident at the Trade Center and the second incident at the Trade Center as two aircraft. We know that one of them, we know at this moment that one of them, according to officials talking both to the Associated Press and a confirmation from ABC's John McWethy at the Pentagon, that it was a commercial aircraft that was hijacked out of Boston, which could have been any time before 9 o'clock this morning, because the first attack on the Trade Tower was just before 9 o'clock, and the second one was after that. And John Miller, you're listening.
Actually, it's interesting. There's no way to characterize any part of this as fortunate, but if you look at cities who are prepared to handle an incident like this, and as you've seen New York's emergency response to this, it is probably one of the few places that is prepared with the kind of equipment, response, and rescue efforts that could actually address something like this. And Washington is probably the other. Immediately when this happened, the entire emergency service unit, which comprises hundreds of specially trained cops, was mobilized to the scene. Now a triage center for the injured has been set up just around the corner from the World Trade Center. It's an incredible scene down there with a tremendous amount of equipment.
The Federal Aviation Administration has actually gone even further than it did a few minutes ago. It was asking all planes not to take off. Now the FAA has ordered all aircraft currently in the air over the United States to land at the nearest airport. Now you can imagine what may be happening, or what they think might be happening in some part of the country, that there is somebody else on some aircraft coming from somewhere or going somewhere with evil intentions, and so all aircraft currently in the air over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport.
I think
hang on just a sec, John. I just want to check one thing, because one of the very first people the President talked to was the director of the FBI, and Pierre Thomas, who covers the Justice Department and the FBI for us, has been here. They may think they prepare for this kind of thing, Pierre, but man, it must have been a shock.
Stunning shock. The FBI Special Operations Center is now in full alert. The FBI extremely concerned that there would be additional attacks. Normally when you have a situation like this, they immediately get on the line with the CIA, the various intelligence agencies, trying to get a sense of who might have been planning something. But right now, the first order of business is to protect against a second attack, third attack. The feeling is normally when you have this kind of situation, there will be more attacks almost immediately.
Let's go to the trade tower again, because, John, we now have what do we have? We don't...
Wow. It looks like a new large plume of smoke.
No, it may be that something fell off the building. It may be that something has fallen. We don't know, to be perfectly honest. But that is what you're looking at, is the current. That's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Dan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daler down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole...